Hi, welcome to another episode of History in 7 Facts. In this show, we'll explore some of the most interesting things that we know or not know about our own past. In the second chapter of this series, we're going to discover some of the lost ancient worlds to see if we can find some interesting facts you may not know. In today's episode, we'll take a look at one of Egypt's most legendary and mysterious figures, King Scorpion. Ancient Egypt wasn't always a united kingdom, but rather a divided region between two separate political entities, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. But how these two kingdoms united to form the powerful empire we know today is still up for debate. But a hastily scratched image of a scorpion in the middle of the desert is, however unlikely, one of our major clues as to how the Egyptian empire began. That symbol and the story it tells us strongly hints to one mysterious ruler we now know as the Scorpion King. Okay, let's back up a little. Around the year 5000 BC, the first Egyptian clans still lived in small settlements in areas that are now arid deserts, but back then were still fertile savannas. There were seasonal rivers flowing into the Nile, and those rivers were used to ship goods from one settlement to the other. Carvings and tablets from those periods clearly depict a rich landscape full of hippos, crocodiles, predators, and herbivores. The settlements all had their own gods, each with their own version of the divine, but through trade there was also a constant cultural exchange, and it is believed that these many gods gradually merged together to form the Egyptian pantheon we've come to know today. Obviously, distance was a factor, so the settlements that were close to each other started to band together. By 4000 BC, there were at least 42 city-states. Due to cultural ties, but also territorial aggression, these city-states formed alliances, 20 of them emerging as Lower Egypt and 22 creating Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt, however, had a problem, a big one: climate change. Less precipitation meant more failed crops, and the rivers were drying up, which meant no possibility to irrigate the land. The people of Upper Egypt had to move or face starvation, and where else to move but north, towards the Nile's delta. But there was a problem. The north was already occupied by the people of Lower Egypt. Historians today believe that this shift in the region's climate was the most likely cause for the wars that eventually led to the unification of Egypt. It was thousands of years later that Manetho, also called Chebnucher, an Egyptian priest from the 4th century, wrote Egypt Theaka, the history of Egypt, in which he wrote about a conqueror risen from the desert sands who defeated the king of Lower Egypt and proclaimed himself as the king of all Egypt. He unified the red and white crowns of the two kingdoms and established the capital at Mennefer, today known as Memphis. Side note: Memphis used to house the temple of the god Ptah, called Hut-Kap-Ptah, which rendered in Greek was I-Gi-Tos. Thus the term Egypt was born. Anyway, the first king that unified Egypt was named by Manetho as Menes, the first pharaoh of the kingdom and the founder of the first dynasty. He ruled for 62 years until he was killed by a hippo. So, problem solved, right? No, not really. You see, there are no records of Menes, so this name is probably a mere description of a long-lost hero of the ancient world. Until 1898, this was pretty much all we knew about the origins of ancient Egypt. Then, the discovery of a tablet in Nekhen, another ancient capital, gave historians more insight as to the ancient history of this old civilization. The tablet portrayed a powerful king who defeated his enemies, lined up their beheaded bodies, and crushed their armies. On one side of the tablet, he was wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt as he was defeating the north. On the other side, he is wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, showing him as the absolute winner. His name was also written down, Narmer, meaning raging catfish. This guy was the first to rule all of Egypt. Nekhen was a powerful city, a cultural center, and many artifacts have been discovered here. Many of them mention kings known as the crocodile and the catfish. But something else was also found here. A large stone mace head with a king wearing only the white crown of Upper Egypt defeating his enemies just like Narmer. But this guy had a different symbol attributed to him, the scorpion. So who was he? Remember at the beginning of the video, I told you about a hastily scratched image of a scorpion in the middle of the desert. Well, about 100 kilometers from Nekhen, at Jebel Jauti, carved in limestone, lies a 5,250-year-old tableau of a victorious ruler. This might be one of, if not the oldest historic document of mankind. The symbols are different from the nicely carved hieroglyphs we're used to. These are handmade, not by a scholar, but perhaps by a soldier of the victorious army. On the scorpion tableau are figures and symbols that appear to depict the procession of a ruler returning to the city of Abydos after vanquishing the rival leader of Nakada, a settlement of Upper Egypt. A falcon is drawn above a scorpion, which is a standard symbol for the god Horus, and the name Horus is another word for king in Egyptian history. So the subject of the tableau is thought to be the one king scorpion, once assumed to be a mythical ruler. These symbols are thought to have been carved right there near the battlefield, probably right after the battle. This proves that the Scorpion King was real and that the unification of Egypt was actually a long process, a series of wars started by the Scorpion King. A tomb found in Abydos in 1990 showed the same scorpion symbol, along with others, and many scholars believe that this is actually the tomb of the Scorpion King. So who was he? Well, he wasn't the king that unified Egypt. Instead, he was the one who consolidated his power in Upper Egypt, waging a series of wars and quite possibly becoming the first ruler of the entire Upper Kingdom. He was probably the one to raise an army powerful enough to conquer the north, thus creating the basis from which Narmer, the next pharaoh, would eventually conquer the people of the Nile Delta. When talking about ancient Egypt, don't think of it as just a cool but foreign culture. No, this civilization was one of the first to rise and was one of the longest lasting. It represents the beginning of human civilization as a whole. So knowing how it all began isn't just interesting, it's a piece of our past. Knowing how to separate myths from actual events helps us better understand how we transitioned from hunter-gatherers to farmers, soldiers, and scholars. Remember that this was one of the places where humans started to feel the need to write down their own thoughts. They had to invent everything, they had no one to learn from. And invent they did. The Egyptians had to invent mathematics, geometry, surveying, metallurgy, astronomy, accounting, writing, paper, medicine, the ramp, the lever, the plow, the sickle, the calendar, mills, and even the police, wigs, surgical instruments, makeup, toothpaste, and so much more. There's one more fact to mention. The beginning of ancient Egypt doesn't seem to be tied only to the Scorpion King and Narmer. There is one more pharaoh to mention, Ka, also known as Second. This guy stands out because he ruled before Narmer or Scorpion, and his crest appeared on many artifacts in many regions, signifying that under his rule, the procession of unification, either by alliance or force, had started. Remember, these things happened 5,200 years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. But these three pharaohs represent the last figures of what is now called Dynasty Zero, and the ones who initiated the transition to a new order, with Narmer having ended the old fractured Egypt and started the first dynasty of a unified nation, a nation that would last for almost 4,000 years. Thank you for watching this episode of 7 Facts. I hope this was interesting and informative, and maybe it even inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. While you're downstairs, let me know what you think about this video. Please consider visiting my Patreon page and become a patron. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.